Welcome back. My name is Sam Hassel, and in today's episode, we are going to be conducting yet another case study. So, this is now going to be a junior student. So, the last three that we've had on the podcast have been all 10th graders. So, we're going to get into a student who's a little bit in the later stages, the back nine of the process here, and we're gonna dive in. Before we do that, quick reminder again: if you want us to review your candidacy or your student's candidacy, shoot us an email info@greatmindsadvising.com. And if you are a senior, have a senior, and you want us to take a look after decisions come back here in the early round, again, shoot us an email info@greatmindsadvising.com. We'll put it in the show notes as well, and we'll let you know if we can cover you on an upcoming episode to the betterment of humanity and all those aspiring to attend a highly selective college. Okay, so let's get into this student's candidacy here. So again, junior in high school. I'm going to start things off here by going through their transcript. So the student does go to a top private school. So in ninth grade, they had all A's, so no B's on their transcript. We have a semester breakdown here. So the students' grades on their transcript, they have different semesters, even if it's a year-long course. They have semester one, semester two, and then of course, if it's a semester-long class only, then they have a semester grade. So no B's in ninth grade. We have some A minuses and some A's. In terms of some of their classes, they took some pretty basic, English, world history, math, Spanish too, etc. So nothing super outlandish and no B's. Then in 10th grade here, so sophomore year, we have some honors classes. So this student's school, as is the case, it sort of depends, but a lot more private schools do not have AP curricula anymore. It sort of depends. So this student school has honors courses, and they have one class above that as well. So they started taking some honors, sort of some college equivalent classes: U.S. history, chemistry, Spanish. They have three of those in 10th grade. And then they have all A's with the exception of one class. So the honors U.S. history, they had a B plus in semester two. So, as mentioned many, many, many times on the podcast, we do not want to see any B's on your transcript, regardless of how hard your course rigor is, right? So, as I mentioned before, if you have any B's on your transcript, by definition, you are over indexed on course rigor. Right now, of course, we don't 100% know that it's attributable to the difficulty of the course, but that's how we define things when you're sort of trying to, assess between the sort of everlasting, the eternal seesaw between course rigor and your grades. One thing I'll say here is, first of all, if you're going to have a grade that is lower than an A, the earlier it is in high school, the better, right? So there's a strong recency bias in admissions. That being said, there are a lot of people that are holding out hope that because they have some lower grades, but they got them in ninth grade or 10th grade, that they're not going to matter because they've heard this, if your grades are on an upward trajectory. The problem with that logic is everything in admissions comes down to scarcity. And so if there are a sufficient number of students who basically everything else is equal between you and them, and I just have enough students to choose from, right? There's no shortage of students who have straight A's. Well, I could just take the student who has all straight A's, right? And so you're not competing in a vacuum, you're competing against other students, right? And since there are so many students, and the supply versus demand is so imbalanced at this small handful of colleges, these top 20 US colleges that most people want to go to, hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people, because there's that huge imbalance. These colleges can demand from the market perfection or very close to perfection. If that weren't the case, right? If that weren't sort of the market, if there weren't this huge imbalance, then they just have to fill their class, right? And so that's what you see at much less selective schools. If you hit a certain grade cutoff, you're automatically admitted to the college. So the student does have a B plus in an honors class in sophomore year. Now, one thing that's a little bit better here is they do have the semester breakdown, and it was a B plus in a semester. Now it would have been better if the school had a year-end grade. Now we don't know what it would have come out to because they had an A minus in semester 1, they had a B plus in semester 2, so it would have been very marginal. But if the students would have ended up with, let's just say, a very low A minus for the final grade, and the school reported on its transcript, semester 1 A minus, semester 2 B plus, but, a final grade of A minus. Obviously, it would be the best if you can only see the final year grade, that's most common for different high schools. An A minus would have been the absolute best case, just year-end grade. You don't even see any Bs. Second best would have been there's a year-end grade, so they put the semester breakdown, semester 1, semester 2, but then a year-end grade, and the students didn't have a B. But in this case, you can actually see the B plus. It's in the second semester. That being said, again, it is a semester breakdown, so there are going to be basically a lot more A's on the student's transcript, versus if you were just seeing final year grades. So it does look a little bit more diluted. But one of the first things that I look for in any transcript is just immediately any B's. Right? You don't get a ton of credit for A's. You're applying to the most competitive colleges in the world. So we don't sort of start from the ground up and sort of say, hey, oh, you got an A. Wow, amazing. Oh, wow, you got another A. Wow, amazing. That's not how it works, right? The expectation is excellence by default. Anything that's less than excellence is a detraction, but you don't get a lot of credit in the positive direction because these are the schools that you're talking about. So that's not ideal. They have 3 different honors classes. This is just true of a lot of private schools that sort of have similar curricula. There are also going to be classes that the high school designates as honors classes, which is great for just sort of superficial optics. It's better to have than to not. And if the school weights the GPA as the student school actually does, which is a little bit unconventional, at private schools, it's definitely done less, or with less frequency at private schools than it is at public schools. And the computation of the GPA is also done to a lesser extent at private schools than it is at public schools. But if there's a weighted GPA as there is at the student's high school, then of course that's also obviously nice for your weighted GPA. Though I've advised many people many times that course rigor and grade should be viewed as 2 separate constructs, not intertwined. And colleges will not take a weighted GPA on its surface because that is very subjective. There's a very subjective calculation there that's performed by 1 out of 30,000 US high schools. It's nice a student does have 3 honors courses, but one of them they have a B plus in. The honors chemistry is totally fine. They have some electives that are potentially relevant to their narrative. So they do have again, very private school. You won't see a class relating to human rights typically at many public schools. So they do have sort of an elective there that will potentially intersect with some of their positioning and their resume related to sort of, some ethical themes. So that's sort of nice in terms of some relevance. They also have an acting workshop that will be relevant to some of their extracurricular themes. So some of their electives, on sort of the positive side, they do have a bunch of A's. They do have 3 of these honors classes in 10th grade. It's not the most metrics heavy profile. If you want some good examples of much more metrics heavy profile, see some of the earlier case studies we went through last week for some 10th graders who are very heavy on metrics, both rigor and then also GPA. There are some positive things. Again, they do have a few honors classes here by 10th grade. They're mostly A's. They do have some nice electives that also will help to support their hook and their narrative. Okay, now we get to 11th grade, the current year. So they have an honors class in theater. Again, take that with a grain of salt when it comes to colleges, sort of considering that a core class, but it is nice for the students' weighted GPA. To some extent, I'm assuming I went through their school profile. I'm pretty sure they assign weight to any class that is an honors class. Sometimes schools won't count things that are very elective or fine arts or obviously gym. I don't have their school profile in front of me, but I'm going to say that they count the honors theater class in the weighting. They have 6 total honors classes, which are considered, again, college equivalents at the student's high school. They have an English class. They have an elective class that is a very weird niche class that I'm not going to actually mention because it might give away the student's high school. Again, very private school-like. It could be related a bit to maybe ethics. It's related to science. So again, some of their potential themes. They have a honor psychology class that is not meant to be taken in lieu of a core science class, as I've mentioned on the podcast. but they have it in parallel with a core science. So the core sciences, there are only three of them, right? Biology, chemistry, and physics. Those are your main bread and butter science classes. You should not be substituting things like psychology or environmental science or fluffier science classes or more fringe science classes for hardcore STEM classes. So the student's not doing that. They're using it to pair up with a core science class and getting some additional rigor. They have Honor Spanish 4. That being said, the math is not great in terms of course rigor, so the student in junior year is just taking pre-calculus. As we go through these different profiles and case studies, we see students who have different deficiencies in different compartments of their profile. So the student does not have a very strong amount of math course rigor. We'll get into some of their senior year courses, but they're on track for Calc AB, which we've basically defined as the absolute bare minimum math course rigor when you're applying to top colleges. And that's not even for top 5 or top 10. That's just any top college, top 20 in general, right? So that is just bare minimum table stakes. So that's the student basically will have a net advantage against basically no other students in the applicant pool at the top colleges. Unless they come from very under-resourced high schools or they're really just not great at math. But for any real competitive students, they don't have any advantage in terms of math course rigor against them because that basically is just basically the bare minimum for competitive applicants to top colleges. That's not the best. On the positive side, again, they have the 6 honors courses. They have a bit of the doubling up with psychology. How psychology is labeled, it can sometimes be a science, it can sometimes be a social science. So it depends on the high school. So bunch of course rigor is good. And then they have some, extra honors course rigor electives. They have the theater, which is going to be relevant to their narrative. On the negative side, they don't have a very rigorous math progression. And they also, it looks like have a B plus, but it's unclear where exactly this B plus stands. I'm not sure if the student's high school gives mid-semester grades, which basically are the quarter equivalents. This looks like it was copy and pasted onto the transcript, the 11th grade grades. And they're not really aligned, so it looks like they were just copied. It looks like either they have a mid-semester grade of a B plus. The end of the first semester shouldn't be here yet because we're in early December. So I'm not really sure what that B plus is. The student's definitely skating on thin ice, already having a B plus on their transcript. And particularly if we're talking about top 10, top 5 colleges, the more that you move up, again, the stakes just get raised further and further, right? So if you're going from top 25 colleges to top 15 to top 10 to top 5, just the pressure to be perfect or near perfect or to be absolutely excellent just keeps increasing. I don't like that they have another potential B plus in progress for another class here on their transcript in 11th grade. That being said, we don't know that this is actually on their transcript yet because I don't think their first semester is over yet. So I'm not really sure exactly what that is, but having already a sub A grade on the transcript from prior years isn't great. And then you're really just digging yourself a deeper hole if you end up with another sub A grade here. Let's get into some of the rest of their profile. So they took a college credit course outside of school that was related to global perspectives. I'm not really sure exactly. This seems like it was maybe related to a theater program. That's going to be some of their hook and their resume building here. Their proposed coursework for 12th grade here is they're going to take another college level course in English, another college level course in Spanish, another college level course in biology. One thing that I would just slightly note here, a lot of people just choose their course selection devoid of some evidence. So you want to look at the past. If a student has had any issues, a grade that's lower than an A in that subject, you may want to consider that when you're choosing your courses in the future. So it looks like they currently, as I mentioned, potentially have a B plus in the current honors biology class. And so you do have to sort of take that into account. There's a bunch of other constraints on course selection in terms of picking the classes, but one of them for sure, one of the considerations has to be past track record in that subject. Then we have an honors statistics class that is helpful in terms of because their math progression is just not super impressive. They're only getting up to Calc AB. So it is nice to sort of flank that a little bit, assuming that's not going to then bring down their grades potentially. So that is nice somewhat to potentially get the extra math kicker in there just because their main math progression isn't that great. They have another honors theater course, and they have an honors course that is sort of related to philosophy and ethics that is semester long. Again, could be relevant to their narrative a little bit. Now, in terms of that biology course, I don't love it. And they put versus a class in marine biology or forensics, which would be a semester each. I'm assuming they would be debating between taking the college level biology class their high school versus maybe taking a semester in marine bio or forensics. I don't really like the 2 semester option here. These are sort of very fluffy science classes, so I don't like them. The biology class has the issue of, again, the student's track record. If they've gotten grades that are lower than A, you have to take that seriously into account and sort of understand what their proficiency is in that subject, and that being at risk of potentially, again, not being an A. The other issue here is the student does have a hook that is relevant. There are a few different themes that we pointed out. So one of them is sort of a bit of the ethical considerations, a little bit of like philosophy, then some theater. But the main core, the main hub of their hook is going to be related to environmental themes, specifically conservation. You might sort of say, okay, well, maybe do the marine biology or something like that, but it's not rigorous enough, right? And so there is this delicate balance between rigor and core subjects, and then subjects that are relevant to the student's hook, right? And there's a balance here. I don't love their track record in biology. And if there is a class, I didn't go through their entire course catalog, but if there is a class that is something like, honors environmental science, which I'm sure there probably is, that would be something to strongly consider given the student's hook and their interest in environmental studies, conservation, etc. That is the biggest part of their hook. And so you might want to be taking a class like that, but I wouldn't do something like a marine biology semester long and has no honors designation next to it. You get no weighting there. It seems like a very fluffy elective, right? You would want like a core, it's not really a bread and butter science class, but it at least is more of a heavy hitting, class in terms of being relevant to the student's narrative in an environmental science class and ideally an honors college equivalent level class or higher. But you don't also want them to not take a core science class. So that would be sort of a situation where you might double up and do something like an honors level class in environmental science here, and then try to potentially put another core science next to it, adjacent to it, and that probably would end up kicking out the honor statistics class. So it's nice that they have the honor statistics class because their main math progression is pretty weak, but you're likely not going to be able to do both where you're doing 2 maths and 2 sciences. So, I mean, maybe it's a possibility and maybe they could kick something else out. It's just course selection is just a very big puzzle, but those are some of my thoughts. I would otherwise approve the extra math class because the math progression is weak, but I think the student might need to come up with a more hook relevant science class, but then not lose a core science class, which would put them in a position to potentially take 2 science classes here. These are sort of the different constraints and different considerations when you're working with course selection, and it's not always perfect. Sometimes you can't satisfy all of the constraints, all the parameters. You just have to do the best that you can on net. And again, in terms of their course rigor, I mean, what they're on track to sort of do in senior year. Some of these again are like honors classes with an asterisk. It's great that their high school considers them honors class, but they're not really bread and butter core classes. Their course rigor is good. They have some grades issues, some course rigor with the math. They're not absolutely elite tier metrics, as we've seen with some other students. Then in terms of testing, they took the AP exam in US history. So again, their high school does not have an AP curriculum formally. That does not mean that students still don't take the AP exam. It depends by the high school. It just depends by the students, right? Sort of how adjacent to the AP exams is the non-AP curriculum at the high school, how much self-studying will the student have to do. But there are students who just simply self-study entirely for AP exams without taking any class. So if your school, you're at a private school, public school, whatever it is, they don't have an AP curriculum, it doesn't mean there aren't students who aren't still taking the AP exams. So the student took AP US history, they got a 4. So that is a submittable score, but it's not a 5. not the absolute best metrics. Again, there are going to be students who have just more APs and more AP exams as well by 11th grade. And then in terms of SAT, ACT, so the student has a 35 on the ACT as of September 2025 on their first attempt. So that's great. I don't know what the section breakdowns are, but the composite score overall is obviously very good and competitive for top colleges. In terms of some other future AP exams, they noted here that they are signed up for APs presumably in junior year, AP Literature, AP Spanish, AP Biology, and AP Psych. So that's good. Obviously, those are still pending though, so I'll have to see how they do in those classes. So that's pretty much it in terms of their metrics background, their main academic index. Now we're going to get into the soft factors, the extracurriculars, the positioning, the hook. So they put here a little nice tagline. Not a bad idea. Is to write out one line. You'll see this in resumes, you'll see this in LinkedIn bios, sort of a one line pithy summation of what your hook is. So they put passionate about using storytelling via theater to instill empathy and ethical principles in wildlife conservation. There's sort of the theater or the storytelling component, as we've mentioned. There's sort of the ethical psychology slash maybe philosophy components. I would say more philosophy, and ethics proper. And then we have the wildlife conservation, which is more the environmental umbrella and conservation specifically. So it sort of has a bit of three horns here. So we're going to talk a little bit of how this will get positioned or translated to the actual colleges and what that sort of means for the students' positioning in their resume. So, okay, let's go through their extracurricular activities, and this is going to be a lot. So I've sort of said before on the podcast, there are some people who have no on switch, and then there's some people who have no off switch, right? So this will look like the no off switch resume, which is a lot of different activities. Number one, 2025 to present, founder of an organization, and I heavily redacted the student's resume, basically, so there was no privacy concerns or anything. So in some cases, I'm going to just be substituting words or more generic titles just to sort of redact the names of cities or counties or the high school or things that would be very specific giveaways. Okay, so they were founder of an organization mixing theater and wildlife conservation. So they created or are creating, this sounds like it's relatively new, a theater based curriculum and workshops for elementary school students that educates and instills empathy and ethics for wildlife conservation. Designed a curriculum and workshops, collaborated with community partners, applied for a fellowship grant to conduct workshops, awaiting decision on the grant by mid-December, will run the program regardless of whether the grant is awarded. So they have basically their own little organization that is devoted to one of their main themes. And so know that this is an intersection activity and it's sort of a nexus activity. It takes a couple of different passions and it intersects them, right? And that is one of the ways that you can stand out is by being in the middle of the Venn diagram, being in the overlap between two different fields, especially fields that maybe are not very often intersected. So some students, we did the Stanford application review episode and that student had an intersection, but that intersection was biomedical engineering. And so you're just taking two extremely competitive fields and intersecting them, and that's still an extremely competitive niche, biomedical engineering, right? So you have to understand what you're intersecting, but the student does have sort of this intersection activity. I don't know if they got this from the podcast, but yes, that is very reminiscent of the strategy that we often propose. There's different ways of creating niches. Having two disciplines and sort of merging them just tends to be one way. The other reason why it's also strategically advantageous is because a lot of times students have different passions or different skill sets. And the way that you can create a more coherent narrative is by finding a way to intersect them. Whereas if you just made one of the passions or the strengths relevant to the narrative, it would cut out the rest of their background. If you had a student who was a social entrepreneur and they have a bunch of sort of social justice or socially oriented activities in their background, and you only position them for business or entrepreneurship, you would maybe remove, 50% of the value in their candidacy because you've chosen a filter that doesn't actually sort of shine light on all of the value in their candidacy that they actually built. Interdisciplinary positioning tends to be ideal because, you can get some sort of cool themes from it. You might have fields that are sort of on their surface don't seem like they're very related to each other. We, had an episode on the student who was interested in writing, but also interested in aerospace engineering or mechanical engineering. Those don't usually intersect with each other. They sort of seem like two different types of students. And so that's sort of where you get the sort of prediction error on the part of the admissions officer, a little bit of surprise. It's cool, it's interesting, it's something that can be explained in the essays. There are fewer students who might have that sort of juxtaposition, or intersection. Again, you're in the middle of the Venn diagram, which is where the fewest number of people are, and then it also allows you to subsume a greater amount of the resume that they potentially built. So the student had a lot of theater stuff in their profile, and they also have this environmental and conservation interest. And so, well, how do you basically make sense out of all that? You have to start coming up with themes where the student is sort of intersecting them. And so this organization would be along those lines. For number two, they put independent research project to study if theater can be an effective means of instilling empathy for wildlife conservation. I'll ruin the ending here. Yes, I'm sure it could be an effective means. When they say independent research project, I'm not really sure if this is just something that's going to be conducted by the student. If so, that's not super ideal. I don't know if it's potentially related to a high school class. There's sometimes independent study classes. I don't think it's related to one of their classes. They didn't mention anything about it. But we have had students, where that is actually the case. We had the student who was the sociology student, and she was had some global studies themes, and there was a global studies capstone project at her high school. So it could be occurring in the context of a high school, an independent study class, or some relevant class. It could be the student just doing it by themselves. It could be the student, is sort of doing it with a researcher or a professor, maybe outside of academia. Sometimes people work with, MDs or somebody in a practice or some other setting. If this is just done by the student, it's not super ideal, because it lacks some of the technical supervision, and it also lacks legitimacy. So you do have to be a little bit careful. It is nice in the sort of control your own adventure way of you have greater control than if you're working with a professor. But you also the trade-off is legitimacy, and then like a supportive environment for the project, resources, and then again the technical expertise sort of overseeing or helping the students. Now they put here submitting a paper for publication June to October, might have to rush this timeline to actually have it published. So, this can't be a peer-reviewed publication, which is the main type of that's sort of the next level differentiator for top colleges. It's in a peer-reviewed journal, and increasingly colleges want to know, what the student actually contributed. So Yale, for example, which the student has on their list. Yale has a research supplement, is a research addendum, and you have to talk specifically about what your mentor was on the project, how you conducted the research, what you very specifically contributed to the research, um, because otherwise it's not very clear, sort of how much of this was the student versus how much of this was other parties. So you have to expect that coming up. And there are other top colleges, Columbia, for example, who also have research addenda in their applications. Caltech is starting to unfold apparently an AI configuration to sort of vet students' understanding of the research and sort of what they contributed. So some of this will be scrutinized, and you do have to be aware of that. When it comes to peer-reviewed publications, that's going to be the highest. Those are professional journals that professors and professional academics submit to. That's the highest on the totem pole, and so if a high schooler has one of those, they were part of a lab group, and they end up with an authorship on one of those, that's sort of the most meaningful. But peer review, publications are obviously a lot more rare for high school students to have. That's why they stand out more. So then you sort of have high school level journals. If they're just starting, there's no chance that this is going to go in a peer reviewed any serious peer reviewed journal because the timeline doesn't actually match. Things take a lot longer in terms of submission. Students that have peer-reviewed publications typically begin working on those projects. In some cases, we had a student who applied last year, and she started working on the project in ninth grade, going into 10th grade. And because the timeline is long for both, especially if it's an experimental design, it just takes a while. The studies take, a while to run. There could be multiple experiments, and then you have to go through the whole publication process, and then it gets submitted to the journal, then it bounces around, maybe it doesn't get in, maybe it gets sent back for revision, and then it's in press, and then it's in publication. It's a whole, life cycle in terms of getting a peer-reviewed publication. That's why you also have to start earlier on researching some of these projects if you hope to get to that level and that sort of next level of a peer-reviewed publication, because it's just much less likely. The other way that I will mention that some students have sort of been able to and not intentionally, by the way, but it's just something to understand. If the study is more of a qualitative study, meaning it's more like surveying doctors or something like that, this just depends on with whom you're working, and sort of what methods they're using, which again just backs into the strategy of the process, is what is the student's passions, what's their positioning. If you're doing a qualitative study, it doesn't take as long to run. It's not sort of a full-fledged experimental design. Those can have shorter turnarounds, just because they're not as experimentally or quantitatively rigorous. I mean, they could be quantitatively rigorous in terms of what, it depends on what sort of statistical analyses and data you're sort of running, but the designs are much more simple. In some cases, it depends. If you're doing like a super large scale, or if it's a longitudinal study, then obviously by definition, it won't take a short period of time, unless it is a very short period of time that you're measuring it over. But there's obviously all different study designs, and some types of research can lend a bit better to a faster timeline to publication. But again, that all depends on what the students' fields are. And so there are those different domain specific areas of variance. In terms of, again, independent research project, I don't know. It seems very informal and unofficial. And in terms of submitting a paper for publication at this point, given the student's a junior, it would have to be a lesser journal, which is fine. It's better than obviously nothing, but it's not hitting sort of the top tiers. And again, when you're sort of talking about the most selective colleges, there's going to be a gradient here. In terms of number 3 here on their extracurriculars, so they're a finalist for a fellowship that's related to conservation. They put international contest. International contest sounds great. It doesn't necessarily tell you that much. It could be international, but like not a lot of people know about it. It doesn't mean it's IMO or something. It's good for packaging and branding. I don't know exactly how impressive this is, and there's so many different awards that you have to really like do a deep dive into how impressive something is, unless it's just a very name brand award. I also redacted the information, the name of the organization or the award for privacy reasons here. I think this is where the student may be getting their grant for their program as well, if this comes through. Number 4, so 2023 to present, community service in wildlife conservation. So 400 plus hours leading habitat restoration events, beach and bay cleanups, crafting toys for shelter dogs via local humane society. So that's very cool. Notice when we talk a lot about service, this is a very good example of much more niche, better service. So first of all, it's very likable. The crafting toys for shelter dogs, right? Very likable. Could go in an essay and be very fun and interesting. It's much more niche. It's not just, again, very, very basic, generic community service. I tend to believe it's very genuine. It's a very high hour count, which is a lot better of an honest signal. Again, assuming that that hour count isn't required by the high school. Private high schools typically don't require community service. It depends. Again, everything depends. But 400 plus hours, that's not going to be a requirement by any high school, because that's an extremely large amount of community service. So 400 plus is sort of an honest signal. There's also an honest signal or a handicapping by virtue of its relevance to the student's academic interest and the conservation. It's very niche. It's very specific. And so this is an example of service done in a much better capacity. Number 5, Presidential Volunteer Award. Gold doesn't really mean very much. It's just a generic service award, and it's basically an epiphenomenal award, which basically means it doesn't include any new information. It's just sort of hour counts, etc. This isn't a standout award, but the student's community service is niche and interesting and relevant to their hook. Number 6, 2023 to present, actor in multiple public productions and musicals and plays, including lead role in a play nominated for Best Musical Production at a local town awards. So this is sort of the theater part of their narrative. 2024 to present, vice president and will be president in senior year for a school club focused on the use of technology for environmental restoration. So again, we see the environmental theme. Regional, national, international outreach and chapters involving collaboration from youth around the world. And they put may win a youth environmental award. So obviously that's pending. I don't really know because we don't have all the specifics here in terms of what they mean by regional, national, international outreach. It sounds good in terms of involving youth, around the world. So this is sort of again the measurable impact, the measurable stats, the scale. Scale comes from how many. If it's a business, how much revenue. If it's workshops, how many workshops, how many countries, how many team members. These are metrics, not metrics in the context of your academic index, but metrics in the context of your resume. But there's a reason why we use metrics in scale factors because you can measure things. Otherwise, it's very, very nebulous and ambiguous. Number 8, 2024 to present, ethics related. So this is not the name of the committee. It's an ethics related high school committee. At the student's high school, they were elected by peers to collaborate with faculty on disciplinary recommendations. You see this at, some private schools and some boarding schools. At Sam's high school, if you cheat, you just go to jail for the rest of your life. And that's it. We throw the book at you. There's no democracy. Just kidding. Yeah, this is something you do see at some private schools and boarding schools. Is just sort of a disciplinary committee, and some students sort of will sit on it and collaborate with faculty. Again, you see the same themes that, again, just pop up based on the students' type of high school they go to, their geographic region, sometimes their ethnic, racial background, et cetera, et cetera. You see very similar patterns that pop up. Private schools tend to do many similar things. Public schools, large public schools tend to do many similar things as well, and so you just sort of, you learn some of this pattern recognition as I've mentioned. You also learn it in terms of different student types and different student archetypes. You have some students that they're very good at the resume parts, but they don't have elite level stats. They have elite level resumes, but not elite level stats. There's students who have elite level stats, but don't have elite level resume building capacities. They're not exceptional doers, not very high agency, not super high initiative. They operate very well in structure and inside of a box, but not very well outside of it. And so you just learn all these patterns over time. The ethics was nice, obviously, with the committee. It's at least relevant to the student's narrative. It's not just another kid who just sits on, sort of one of these committees. Number 9, part of the high school performing arts department as the director of media, so relevant to sort of the theater angle. Number 10, 2025 to present. I omitted the name of this for privacy reasons, but this is leadership and organization of student life events on campus, including peer support events. Number 11, they're an ambassador for their high school again. So this is campus tours for prospective students and families and speaker at admissions events. I swear every single kid who goes to a private school has this activity in their resume. It's like I want to throw my computer against the wall. Every kid who goes to a private school has this ambassador activity. It's not even remotely unique. I'm sure they know that this is a very long form. They call this the rambling resume. So this is a very long form resume, which you should always put together. You should always have a very long form version of your resume and always keep it up to date, because a lot of students forget things. You can't see the whole picture. You can't see all the information, right? And so I basically analogized this process to, by the time that you're creating the final application, it's like creating a film trailer for a movie. But you probably want as much film footage as possible to create the best trailer. You want all of the information. That is the main information processing model that we use, is want to be able to see everything. And then once we've seen everything, then we will start to narrow the aperture, right? But we don't want to have gone down a path, particularly for a very strategic type of process, and a type of process that involves strategy over multiple years. You don't want to go down a path without having had all the information first. And so a lot of people just jump to the path, they go down the wrong path, right? Because they're so, let me do all my summer program apps, right? Like, which summer program should I apply to? It's like, wait a second, let's back up here. You want to be able to see all the information first. And so we spend a ton of time on due diligence and discovery. to be able to see all the information first, and then we start consolidating and narrowing the aperture from there. So this is good. The student does have a very long form resume. I would highly recommend this for everybody, that you have something that keeps track of everything that you basically have ever done, even including some middle school activities or awards. As we've seen in some other case study episodes, you can potentially squeeze them in the back door into your college application through the additional information section. So it's good that they have all this stuff, and I'm sure they know this isn't a standout activity. I'm sort of making fun a little bit here and poking the private school kids a little bit with this ambassador activity. All right, number 12. So 2024 to 2025, conservation-related internship for a local zoo wildlife alliance. So selected from several youth applicants in the county following an application interview. 50+ hours with hands-on learning about wildlife conservation advocacy efforts, culminating in a public presentation on management of human-wildlife interface, focusing on a very specific animal group in the Amazon. Again, specificity is great. It's like a very specific animal. It doesn't mean that that's going to be their whole admissions narrative in a very specific geographic region. There's sort of a measurable product here or output, which is the presentation, right? And so you can't just exist in your activities, right? You need specific activities that have specific themes, right? If this is conservation related, it has specificity, right? This isn't I'm good at numbers, so let me do business. Has very specific themes. They are relevant to the students, hook, their narrative. This is sort of an example of sort of not doing maybe very formal academic research, but for some of those who, again, are allergic to research, you can do things like this that are still fairly academic and they're maybe in more of an applied sort of real world setting, like at a local zoo here that has a wildlife alliance. This is sort of more the internship or the organization route, right, which is also great. It's not an either or. You can do both research and you can work with organizations, particularly, again, if you have some sort of activism theme or something like that. It depends on what kind of candidacy you're building, what the strategic vehicles will be, right? So if it's something more activism related, could you do academic research on that field? For sure, right? And that would be great. Then you can also do organizations, and internships and policy internships, etc. This is good. This is going in the right direction. Number 13, so July 2024, this was over the summer. So this would have been ninth grade going into 10th grade. So fellowship with a wildlife and rainforest conservation theme in a foreign country. So this isn't I went on a teen tour or I went on a glorified vacation. This is the student actually traveling elsewhere in the world for something relevant to their academic hook. And so it doesn't look just like privilege or, irrelevant leisure activities. It looks like it's something actually relevant. And in that case, it can actually be a pretty good signal because it shows the student is sort of pursuing this as sort of a function of their being. And they're really passionate. And so, they're going to different places in the world to maybe pursue it. Now, there are some potential optics liabilities, as we can imagine, right? Especially for private school students that you have to sort of be aware of. The students who've done so much in their field, it is an honest signal that they do have a genuine interest, right? Because if you're passionate about something, if you're actually passionate about something, if you're truly genuinely passionate about something, it is harder for you to stop doing it than it is to start doing it, right? And for something that you're not passionate about, it's harder for you to start doing it than it is to stop doing it, right? You would be thrilled to stop doing it, right? So it's like eating ice cream, right? It's like you can eat more of it, right? At some point, yes, you're gonna get sick. Doing homework, you probably would prefer to do less of it, potentially, right? Or whatever it is, doing chores or, who knows what it is, right? Taxes. The abundance of activities that are relevant to a student's hook is somewhat of a signal that there is a genuine passion there, right? Also, if they've taken it to a more extreme level, it's also another honest signal. As I said, students who sort of just do a bunch of things, but it looks like sort of like a very small city. Like it looks like, if you were looking at Omaha, right? It's like what's like the tallest building, like 100 feet. I'm sure it's probably a little taller than that. But then you see like, then there's a kid who has a resume and it looks like the New York City skyline. And so you could sort of see there's like a much lower ceiling for one student in terms of their resume And sometimes it's a function of their skill or their ability, but, many other times, or in addition, it's also just a function of their lack of passion, or sort of like that they really like, they try to do it, but it's like they're always trying to stop, like, they can't wait to stop, right? I say it's sort of like the "Are we there yet, kid?" And their default is foot isn't on the gas pedal. It's like you have to keep telling them to put their foot on the gas pedal. It's like, "Please, let's go. We need to do stuff. Like, you need to do stuff. Like, put your foot on the gas pedal, Bobby. Put it on the gas pedal," right? Versus the kid where it's like, again, I say their foot's on the gas pedal by default, and that's how it should be. Foot stays on the gas pedal until you're told to take it off. And those are the kids who really stand out in this process. And in many other, you want to go work for a super top-notch company, high performing organization. That's how those people operate. The student has a ton of different activities here. It's great that they're also pursuing it in some international context. You have to be a little bit careful about some of the optics, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in future parts here. So they spent 3 weeks in a foreign country planting mangroves to aid sea turtle conservation and installing cameras to identify mammal and poacher activities. Very cool, right? Again, we talked about in some earlier episodes, if your interest is in math, um, just notice the difference if you were to talk about this in essays. It's just like it's like night and day in terms of accessibility to a lay admissions reader, and the stories, it's just like, what story are you going, like, you can tell a story, like, you can tell a story about a fairly boring, dry discipline, but, it still needs to have some creative aspects to it as well. You can signal some parts that are sort of the technical components and technical proficiencies in the essays, and that is certainly good, but you also have to, merge in the creative parts as well, and the storytelling and the narrative components, particularly for the personal essay. The supplements are a little they can be a little bit more formulaic, though they should also still have some creative components mixed with the intellectual components. Um, but just notice sort of like how vivid you can make these scenes and how you could write them in essays, and the students installing cameras. We had a student many years ago, they were absolute standout student. They had likely letters to all the top Ivy and Ivy Plus schools, top scholarships, full scholarships to top 10 college. And she, in her essays, we had an essay about her sort of with she's sort of in the ocean and diving with sharks, and she's got her GoPro camera, and then she's got her diary and her scribbles, and it's very vivid, very cool. It sort of is a bit of the definition of intellectual vitality. You could see the student bringing whatever this theme is or this love of learning to a very interesting context. Very, very cool. Then the fellowship culminated in authorship of a paper related to ethics of frozen zoos. Again, very niche, very specific, very cool and interesting. So that's great. Number 14 in their activities. So 2023 to present, intern at a local science center. So this is a cohort of women in STEM chosen from the county through an application process in middle school, runs through high school years, invited to attend women's STEM leadership opportunities. And they put in parentheses, do not participate due to scheduling conflicts. So I guess they're technically part of it, but they don't attend the conferences or the meetings, I guess. So I guess it's great that they're chosen. It doesn't seem like it has a lot of depth. It does have top line relevance and some intrigue here because it is STEM relevant. It's not specifically conservation or environmentally leaning. Um, but it is STEM. It's got a little bit of this women in STEM theme for number 14 activity. It's fine. 15, 2023, 2024 varsity high school swim team. And then they also, I think, were part of the local swim team, and they quit due to scheduling conflicts, not interested in pursuing swim competitively anymore. Obviously, that's just an example of a common sport, very well-rounded activity. So, um, yeah, we've already spoken about that ad nauseum on the podcast. Number 16, 2024 to 2025 high school acting workshop capstone project. So again, this is back in the theater umbrella. So they had a research paper highlighting case studies of the inclusion of American Sign Language in musical theater productions and an in-depth exploration of their significance. So the sign language isn't going to really intersect with anything relevant to the student's hook, but the acting workshop, sort of some of the independent, the capstone project, independent study, research, these are all great for sort of showing, sort of measurable products, or something that you actually did that was sort of higher initiative and sort of diving into a specific topic, potentially a relevant topic to your hook. So that's all great. Summer 2024, philosophy of human rights research project. Then spring 2024, a theater dramaturgy project. Then 2023 to 2025, high school speech and debate team, varsity, a medal winner in regional competitions, had to quit due to scheduling conflict with theater. Summer 2023, business and entrepreneurship program. I think this was before high school. Summer 2023, if they would be class of 2027. So this would have been right before they started ninth grade, and this isn't relevant to anything. So this would be an easy potential activity to leave off the application because it doesn't seem relevant to anything. The only thing that it potentially is relevant to, I think they mentioned some like technology component here, would be they had something else related to technology in their resume as part of the school club. It was focused on the use of technology for environmental restoration, but this business activity didn't have anything to do with their main hub and their main hook, which is environmentally leaning. It's unlikely it would be application content or included. It's not totally impossible, but it's definitely much more marginal, and it was also before high school. Then they have some other interests here just for context or narrative. So travel, they've seen wildlife in Costa Rica, tigers and rhinos in India, Peruvian Amazon, Australia, Alaska, Florida, Yellowstone National Park coming up, endangered mountain gorillas in Uganda, culture, India, Bali, Ireland, England, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Peru, Ecuador, Mexico, Canada, West Indies, Caribbean, French Polynesia, and multiple states in the US. Extensive travel around the world focused on culture and wildlife that has influenced interest in wildlife conservation along with interest in global perspective since early childhood. The global perspectives isn't they also took a college course, some type of college course in it. Um, Unless it's related to the conservation of the wildlife, it's not gonna be super relevant to their positioning and their application. In all likelihood, unless it's just sort of like a quicker, like a kicker, like short answer question in one of the essays or something, or you just trying to give a little bit of diversity to some of the essay responses, for applications, like particularly Yale's has a lot of questions and a lot of responses. But outside of that, it's not super relevant to the at least the rest of the candidacy they've built and the evidence that they've accumulated. However, the wildlife, the conservation, and that part of it, is more relevant. Again, you have to be very careful about optics here. Again, a student who is from a higher income background, overrepresented minority, as they are. I haven't mentioned this before, but they are an overrepresented minority. Um, private school, you just have to be careful about some of these optics with the travel. We had a student many years ago, was writing the drafts of her Princeton essays, and she put something like, I've traveled to 95 different countries all over the world, and we're just like, not so quick. It doesn't sound the way that you think it sounds. You do have to be careful. I wouldn't go around throwing out this laundry list of all these places. You have to be just a little bit deft with your touch. If you're in an essay and you're talking about wildlife conservation, a few different places, she also has a relevant activity. The one with the fellowship and the wildlife and rainforest conservation, and so that's all fair game. That's totally fine, but just um, be careful once you start rattling off, like 18 different countries. Draw the line at, maybe, 2 or 3 probably maximum, unless it's something like you're scaling an organization that reaches a whole bunch of different countries, or it's part of a club or your workshop program or something that's obviously very different. Okay, so we have that. Then some pre-high school context. They also included 2019 to 2020 Science Olympiad, placed ninth. Lead actor in a performing arts academy. We already have the high school theater related activities, so it's not super important. Local county science field day placed first medal winner, and an elementary school two-time winner of an award for showing random acts of kindness toward peers. Yeah, I mean, maybe this student has so many activities. that it just stretched to include any of these. It's nice to fit in like some extra awards and you can kind of squeeze them in the back door in the additional information section. And they're like kind of relevant because some of them are science awards. And if it takes like 3 words, just the additional information section, the Common App has gotten shortened. Some of these, you know, yeah, they're very fringe and very marginal. It's just you have to look at the whole application, how things come together. But student has a ton of information. So okay, then they put here potential summer 2026 plan. So this is their upcoming summer, their application summer basically, going to senior year. So their current plan is summer workshops and research for the students' organization. So again, I'm not sure what that research is. I don't prefer that it's simply conducted in a solo capacity by the student. I'm just not really sure what it looks like. What's the housing or the structure? What's the legitimacy for this? Is there any, how's the student conducting it? Like what does this look like? And we saw this in our Stanford application review episode. The students sort of had something that was like a diabetes project, but it was like, who helped you with it? Like, how was it done? Like, what was there, like, an output of this, et cetera, and again, there's just degrees of, legitimacy and output and measurable impact, et cetera. So they're gonna work on the workshop program and building that up, and then this research and continue to expand on what has been, started. That is, so when a lot of people plan out their summers, it's very funny because most students' summers look nothing like our students' summers. And this is very similar in terms of like our students, like they're building an organization or like they have their own independent projects. And so that will take up a bunch of summertime potentially. Right. And everybody's very focused on just getting into like summer programs or programs. But for real high flying students, they are doing like they have their own independent initiatives as well, and so they don't need structure imposed upon them. They're able to impose structure upon the world. And so this is sort of when I say, like, I've mentioned in past episodes, you should have the mindset. I mean, you need to have this skill set, obviously, right? But you should have the mindset that as long as you have a laptop, you can work from anywhere in the world and build a candidacy and a resume, right? You don't have to be on a college campus. And it's a very rigid mindset. Now, is it good to have structure and have it housed and potential legitimacy? Yeah, depending on what it is. But there is some rigidity there and also logistics flexibility that you lose. It's not possible to be building several different parts of your resume in parallel, which is what is often required for really impressive resume. If you have a major internship that blacks out like 8 weeks of your summer and it's in person and it's 40 hours a week, right? So the degree of value that would need to be returned to you for that rigid and inflexible of a and significant of a time commitment is major. Like it would need to be a major upside because it has a very large opportunity cost. Just understanding that building a resume, it should consist of potentially some structure and under some umbrellas and organizations and maybe universities and research and some of that. I don't love research being conducted in a lone wolf capacity by the students, but something like their own little organization or their theater workshop for the environment, that is something that you should be building. And during the summer is a great time to really scale it. Though you need to be scaling it all throughout the year, especially for the student because they're very late and they're starting it very late. They even more so can't wait until the summer, and they need to be scaling it. Like they need to be working on it actively now, and they also really need to be working on it actively because they've only started sort of intersecting these theater and these environmental themes very recently. And so you need to sort of evidence that angle a lot more. And so that's why it also needs to be built out even more because you need to build out the glue activities or the intersection activities even more. That's good, though I wouldn't be thinking that we're deferring much of the that activity until the summer. A lot of that needs to occur now. Again, for students who really get um, activities like this to a really high exceptional level, you can imagine that they started them very early. We had a student who, they got one major opportunity that took their what they had built and got it to hundreds of thousands of students. And a lot of that was just compounding progress over many years. But the other part of it, because people are sort of like, how do you do that? Right? How do you get something to like hundreds of thousands of people or students? A lot of it is the affordance of time. When you have a lot of time and you're constantly working on something and constantly seeking opportunities, meeting people, getting business cards, establishing connections, building networks, building relationships, going to conferences, what you're doing, not just in this process, but in life, is you're increasing your luck surface area, right? You're increasing your opportunity for just stumbling upon that 10x or that 100x leverage point, right? Just that one person. Right now, I'm not saying to do this in a like where people just, like they take any meeting and try to set up coffee meetings with every single person in the world. Like you can't do it haphazardly, right? But as long as you're already doing things that are getting you incremental compounding gains, while you're doing that, there's always a chance that you get a 10x in there or 50x or 100x or 1000x opportunity, right? By just meeting the right person. Right? And that's what happened for the student is she happened to meet the right person because she kept putting herself in all those forums and she happened to be the right person. That was the 100x opportunity. Right. So I say this all the time. Most people don't listen because most people don't have the requisite degree of urgency that is really required to be excellent. And I say all the time, this is one of the things that I've realized a lot over time and just in different people. But some people have urgency as their resting state, as their default, and some people need to have urgency imposed upon them by the external world. And you can imagine which group of people accomplish a lot more. You need to have, again, you don't need to do anything, but if you want to be very successful in this process, if you have urgency, you can beat the people who don't have urgency. And if you have a lot of time, you could beat the people who don't have a lot of time. But again, the people who beat everyone are the people who operate with a ton of urgency and they have a lot of time, right? And so I always look at this as just a competitive, everything is just a competitive game, right? And so a lot of people are in this sort of or mindset. It's like, I'll do high urgency in a short period of time. That's fine. You'll be able to beat the people who have a short period of time and have lower urgency than you, but you will not beat the people who have been operating with high urgency or high passion. It can also just be passion, right? The urgency comes by virtue of reward rather than fear of punishment. Passion is also another form of urgency because, again, it's like if you like ice cream, you have high urgency to eat ice cream, right? If you really care about these things, this is why it's so important to really correctly identify and have high self awareness. But if you identify what you're passionate about, that's a huge amount of leverage and it gives you urgency in a positive, rewarding direction. But the best students, again, nothing is an either or with them. The absolute best students have both engines of motivation. They are afraid of what will happen if they do not take the actions that are conducive to their goals. And they also move in a positive direction towards reward at the same time, right? And what they really enjoy. But, if you operate with high urgency on a short time span, you could beat the people who don't operate with high urgency, but you will lose to the people who have high urgency compounded over a very long period of time. The answer from a competitive advantage is always end, right? It's always end. So, this organization and this niche theme would have been a lot more potent, had it started earlier, right? Now could the students have, stumbled upon yeah, they probably could have because they were already doing theater and it seems like their theater interest and their passions and their environmental passions, they go back pretty far in time. And I can also say for certain students that we've seen, even students in some of these actual umbrellas as well, they were, like, building environmental friendly or interested in environmental friendly tree houses when they were, like, 5. It's never too early to start auditing where your attention is going, where your free time is going, what you're interested in, right? Because you sort of view it as a pyramid with the application part of the process being like the highest part of the pyramid or your resume like being the most specific or the most niche or most differentiating. It's always better to be at a higher point in the pyramid at any given point in time, right? And so some people are just starting in 11th grade and they're starting from like the base of the pyramid, right? It's very hard to go from the base of the pyramid to the absolute apex in that short of a period of time, right? So just understanding that. It does seem from just like some of the sentiments that are being conveyed in this information that there's like a lot of this notion. They also mention here Yale Young Global Scholars and sort of potentially using Yale Young Global Scholars to see whether like Yale is a good fit, but that's very far in the future, right? Like you should already know that before like your Yale Young Global Scholars program over the summer. Like there's nothing preventing you from doing a school visit to Yale. If that's, again, there's obviously candidacy evaluations here, right? Like what are they actually in range for? But I don't know why there's certain people who are just red taping things like for no reason. Like they're just in this like very like deferred or in the future. And we see this a lot with people in this like summer mindset of, we're gonna build the resume, over the summer and we're gonna do this. It's like you will lose. You will lose to the person who builds the resume fall, winter, spring, and summer, right? So excellence is not a seasonal activity. Don't be in this like kind of deferring. Now, obviously, the summer is a great time to hit the gas pedal even harder because you don't have school and you do have some more free time. But I would not view this as sort of like there's a lot of people who are sort of in this waiting mindset or in this mindset of all, like tomorrow, or like we'll do more. It's like you cannot be in that mindset. Now, obviously, as soon as built a tremendous resume, it's had to have been built year round. They do have some summer stuff. So I'm sure they're already aware of this and they've acted accordingly. But for many others who are listening to this, a lot of you are in this mindset or of like summers are some special magical season when students build most of their resume and, if you wanna be maximally competitive for the most selective colleges, that just is not it's just not the case, right? It's not a part-time job. It's an all season, all the time job excellence. So, the workshops and building that up and the research that's great for over the summer, we need to really be on the gas pedal right now because that's very late, right? And you are already in some ways like this organization does not have a lot of scale currently. It needs a lot more, right? So sort of talk about the three frameworks, more, better, new. More is just doing more of that thing, right? It's like getting it to more schools, getting it to more students, getting it, to other places in the country, finding other students, recruiting them, having other people. There's no shortage of students who are interested in these topics, right? And again, if you don't want to compete against other students in your grade, because you're worried they're also applying to colleges that you are, just find kids who are in other grades. It's a very easy problem to solve. It needs fast like, and this is why people find themselves in these positions. The student did build a very good resume by 11th grade, but people find themselves in these positions where they need to day trade themselves into $10 million, and you don't want to be in that type of position. It's much easier to have time, a lot of time plus incremental compounding progress is much easier than it is to again be trying to throw Hail Marys, at the end of the game. So we have that, and then they're applying to Yale Young Global Scholars, early action. They'll wait on the decision. This is one of the higher value summer programs. They said here they applied to practice their early action application at Yale. I don't really know what that even means. We'll go to evaluate Yale as a potential REA. It's not Yale doesn't call it REA, and we've mentioned this on the podcast. REA should be used for only two schools, Notre Dame and Georgetown. The rest of the other top 5 schools that use, we call it single choice early action. Yale is actually one of the few of those schools that actually does call it single choice early action. But these are different policies. We have an episode on this. Single choice early action versus restrictive early action. They put collaborate with international students and incorporate that into summer workshop plan or to expand it beyond their local city, which I already mentioned. Like it'd be great if you could expand it beyond your local city, but I wouldn't be waiting or holding your breath on getting into Young Global Scholars to expand it to another city besides your local city. Again, there's no reason for these contingencies. You know what you have to do, which is it needs to scale and become bigger. So I wouldn't, again, be holding your breath on getting into this program. And that, for some reason, I'm not even sure what the connection is there, why that is a contingency. Okay, one of the things that I will say in terms of building really exceptional candidacy is just moving like contingencies, right? There's sort of this like notion of like, we can't do that. Well, like, why can't we do that? And then it's just like, oh, because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, Y and Z are really stupid reasons. So let's just do it. Let's just get rid of those things. Right. So There's students who put constraints that don't need to exist on their candidacy or their resume building. Yeah, it's great. Like you may prefer to do an in-person thing, but if the thing that will give you the highest probability of success for if you are very serious, if you really want to go to a top college, if this is your number one goal and you're very serious about it, you have to make compromises just like as with anything in life. So you might want the in-person opportunity, but the thing that actually is going to help you the best and that maybe keeps your options open or allows you to pursue other things in tandem and has the greatest sort of value throughput might be the asynchronous or the flexible opportunity. And so you may need to remove that constraint that you've artificially imposed, which is you need to do something in person. You may need to remove it. I'm not talking about Yale Global Scholars or anything like that. I'm just talking sort of in general, right? It's like people put artificial constraints and contingencies and it limits their growth or what they can accomplish. And so it's one thing that's very important in this process if you want to do it to the highest degrees. This is true of anything in life. A lot of people, right, who are making the most progress, they identify constraints or parameters or restrictions that don't need to exist. They were like some person in some department made them up in 1976 and they're just garbage, right? But nobody questions them, right? Nobody operates from a first principles mindset and they don't question assumptions or the way that things are currently done. You do need to have that mindset of evaluating certain assumptions or constraints or contingencies that do not need to exist and in fact might be hindering you and your progress. And these could also be personality traits like I can't do this, I can't start a club, I can't just it could be anything. The constraints can also be personal constraints or fears or anxieties, whatever they are. Then they put over the summer, they're going to travel to see jaguars, not the car Jaguar, presumably, but jaguars as in the animal for 2 weeks. I would try to get that down to 1 week because it's great in terms of some of the intellectual vitality, but there's no shortage of that already in the student's application, nor is there any shortage of them traveling or sort of these international components with the wildlife. So it's not really doing anything. Again, from a strategic perspective, the only perspective according to which I'm commenting or we have this podcast, if you're not interested in doing the most for your candidacy of going to a top college, or you're not interested in doing the most strategically or thinking the most strategically, then why are you even listening to this podcast in the first place? I can't imagine even as much as I would want it to be the case that it's for my amazing personality. If you are trying to think in a strategically optimal way, this does nothing for the student's candidacy, but it eats up like a quarter of their time over the summer in a very precious space of time where they need to be working on college applications, but they also need to be putting the final touches on their resume. And they're in this position. So I'll sort of come out with it. Their resume is good. It's very good in the grand scheme of things. So this is not an elite, truly differentiating resume for top 10, top 5 schools, and it's certainly not for Yale, right? Is it in range? Is it in Yale vicinity, versus some other case studies that we've done on the podcast where it's like they are 900 miles away from a top 10 resume. Yeah, you're in shouting distance, but now you're hitting basically this very high, like what I would refer to as like candidacy escape velocity, where it's sort of you become a victim of your own success, right? And so if you're getting to like world class level in anything, it's like a sprinter, 100-meter runner, right? It's like how easy is it? How much easier to go from 13 seconds to 11 seconds in the 100-meter? And then you go to 11 seconds to 10 seconds is extremely like that is a major separator in terms of people who can run an 11-second 100-meter versus can run a 10-second 100-meter, right? And then when you go from a 10-second 100-meter to a 9.5 or whatever Usain Bolt's world record time is, 9.58 or something, it just becomes extremely difficult to get any of those incremental marginal degrees of progress, right? And the same thing happens with a lot of students' candidacies. So there's a lot of different mistakes. One is you just don't understand where you actually are. And so it's very hard to sort of improve something when you don't actually understand your current position, right? That's just a big issue with a lot of people, right? They don't know where their candidacy actually is. And so it's sort of hard to go in a positive direction when you don't even know where the heck you are in the first place, right? So That's one issue, right? But the student has sort of a top 15-ish resume currently, right? Is sort of how I would brand it. Their metrics are also probably like top 20, top 25-ish, somewhere around there, right? This isn't a Yale-level candidacy, and it's not a solidly top 10 candidacy either. And I could talk a little bit more about that. But the problem a lot of people find themselves in is they they just make moves that don't actually like, it's not like, okay, now they're doing things that are like a top 5 from like a top 15. They're just doing more things that are kind of keeping them in the same place, right? And so this is a very good example, right? Travel to see Jaguars. Well, this improves their candidacy by nothing. 0, right? Like, and this is 2 weeks, so this is like a quarter of your summer, and you're getting a net 0. And there's probably a whole bunch of people. If you just started listening to this podcast, hi, my name's Sam. I'm the crazy person who tells you that what excellence actually demands of you. I'm going to lean into this because what a lot of people are probably going to think or they're going to say, right, is have some leisure time. And actually, what I didn't mention here is they had 1 week where they put just like relax time or whatever. That's fine. You just throw away 3 weeks of the last summer that you have to apply to college. And I have another kid who's a killer, and they will beat you in those 3 weeks. Their face will light up when I tell them, and there are kids who are like this because I know what fuels some kids, and some kids is different things, right? But it's just like, you can just tell them that during the 3 weeks, and sometimes they don't even, it's not like they're doing it intentionally, but, like, they would be thrilled to learn that the 3 weeks that they're working super hard, somebody else is letting off the gas pedal, not improving their candidacy, and it's delightful for them to hear that they're beating the other kid, right? Because, like, it's delightful for them to hear that their hard work will be rewarded, because somebody else took their foot off the gas pedal, right? And so I'm gonna lean into this because a lot of people don't like this, and I'm gonna lean into it even harder because I like that they don't like it because, like, they don't have what it takes. They don't have the what it takes, whatever it takes mentality, right? And so they should lose to the person who has the whatever it takes mentality, right? Because everybody's so worried in admissions about equity and fairness and, well, who should win? I think the person probably who cares the most and is willing to sacrifice the most should probably win. I think most people would agree they deserve it the most. Now, just because you try the hardest doesn't mean you will get it. All else being equal, I think they probably deserve it more than the person who takes their foot off the gas pedal. It's not whether you're serious or you're not serious, it's degrees of seriousness. It's not whether you will sacrifice or not sacrifice, it's how much you will sacrifice, right? And so you just have to understand that there are competitive liabilities. When you take your foot off the gas pedal, somebody pushes it on the gas pedal, right? And they go right by you at the end of the race. Could you do the traveling? Just like, you have to understand this is not going to improve the student's candidacy at all. It's doing nothing in terms of their resume building. And you have one final summer before you apply to college. This isn't your 10 years old, and this is, you've already had a whole bunch of summers with no pressures and no constraints and all this stuff. But there are times when you're in the last part of the race and you need to really step it up. You cannot take your foot off the gas pedal. And if I'm being very honest from a competitive mindset, I know that this is the mindset that is why, this is not a sales pitch or an advertisement, but I know these are the little competitive liabilities, the little openings that most people will leave, that I know that our mindset, our program, you have students who have that very rigorous mindset. And you hold them to that standard of that goal of what they say. Because everybody out here likes to say they want to go to Yale, but they don't like the standard that they need to be held to in order to accomplish that goal, right? And I'm going to hold you to that standard whether you like it or not, right? Because that's what, so if you don't want to be held to that standard, change your freaking goals, right? Change your goals, right? Goals are not something we just say because they sound good, because we want to impress a bunch of people, because that's what most people do. When you posit a goal, you have established a standard for your actions, right? And if you don't want to be held accountable to that standard, then don't posit that lofty of a goal. So I know that most people will leave these little liabilities, these little openings, they'll take the foot off the gas pedal, and that is one of the biggest competitive advantages, is not doing that, right? And it's very hard. It's extremely hard because everyone wants to take their foot off the gas pedal. They want to do this. They want to do the trip. They want to, do this little thing over here. That's somebody else's opportunity, right? So write down everything else you're not willing to give up, you're not willing to do, and that's a list of things that the person who will beat you is willing to do, right? And it's just very simple, right? A bunch of people don't like that, and as I said, go listen to somebody else's podcast where it's all rainbows and unicorns and emotions and no stress, and we live in la la land where there's no pressure. You have these crazy goals that very few people accomplish, but you want somebody to tell you that it's not going to be extremely difficult. There's not going to be extreme pressure. There's not going to be a ton of stress. It's not going to be very rigorous. I don't know what world you live in, but that's not reality. It's not helpful to kids in any way whatsoever because it's not prepare them for the realities of the actual world. You need to understand your actions. There are no obligations, but there are consequences. Your actions do have consequences. So if you're very serious about optimizing your candidacy, whether it's this person or anybody else listening to the podcast, just understand you waste a few weeks at the finish line, you potentially concede your spot on the podium. I don't love the traveling to see Jaguars for 2 weeks. I don't like the 1 week of relaxation. You can relax while doing productive things, right? There are a ton of our kids. They are in different places, their families traveling. They're still doing 100% of their resume from a laptop, right? So it's definitely possible. It's definitely possible. People do it all the time, right? Again, high agency mindset. All you need is a laptop. You can do these things. So understand the traveling to see Jaguars, it does nothing. It doesn't add to the student's intellectual vitality, it doesn't add to anything in their resume. It's just 2 weeks thrown by the wayside, purely from a strategic and a competitive perspective for this process. But again, I assume you probably don't listen to me for travel tips or leisurely pursuits or just tell you to relax, right? You probably are listening to this podcast because you want to get into a top college. So that's the lens through which I'm conveying this information. Summer job at a theater school is another one of their planned summer activities. Again, it's not improving their candidacy. Is it okay? Because it's kind of relevant? Sure, right? It's kind of relevant. It's not doing anything to improve their candidacy past where it currently is. So the only things that potentially improve their candidacy somewhat are continuing to scale the summer workshops and their organization, maybe the research, getting to a publication, not going to get into a peer review journal at this point in time, but getting in the high school journal, sure. I mean, that could probably be accomplished potentially during the school year. I don't know. Again, I don't know what this research project entails or what it looks like or what it even is. So that's fine. That would be helping the student's case is scaling the organization and also scaling that narrative, that interdisciplinary narrative of their theater interests and the environmental interests, the conservation interests. If you get into young and global scholars, that's great. It will help your candidacy. But again, we don't know that's actually going to be the case. And so you cannot be holding your breath on highly contingent situations to come through, right? So I mentioned this on another podcast, sort of the 5 deadly resume mistakes that will kill your top college dreams. And one of them is people throwing Hail Marys to get into like super competitive summer programs. And that's like their main answer for what they're going to do in the final leg of their candidacy. And yeah, that could be great. That's not gonna be enough in and of itself anyway. If you get it, it's still not that's still I mean, it will help a student's candidacy for sure, but it depends on what else a student has in their candidacy. Some people don't have, the resume where that's even they need 3 or 4 other high value things that are equivalent to that, right? But you also don't know, you just the expected value is fairly low, right, in terms of the admission rate, the acceptance rate. The student may very well they have a competitive, candidacy for getting into Young Global Scholars, and that may very well come through. But thinking through it from sort of a risk and uncertainty perspective, you do have to hedge your risk. You can't just take super high value moves that have a low probability of success because the expected value, the risk adjusted return is potentially very low. So you need other high value backups, whether this is other alternative, highly competitive or selected programs, summer programs. So another thing that I would love to see that in terms of sort of matching the spirit of what the students have already done, it's very easy to explain to somebody, this is what you already did do more of that. In a prior summer, so this was July 2024, they had the fellowship with the wildlife and the rainforest conservation in a foreign country. They were planting the mangroves, installing cameras. that is like something that should ideally occur, something like that going into senior year. It's something or something like at the local zoo, right? We talked in a recent episode about a student who is doing sort of the science communication activities at a local children's museum. Can you get that to have greater degrees of scale, right? Because just doing the exact same type of program again in senior year, going into senior year, you're not really marginally improving your candidacy, right? You need to take it to another level, right? So whether it's something at the local zoo with the Wildlife Alliance or something. Maybe there's an intersection with the student's organization, right? Intersecting with some of these things, right? But how can you take them to the next level? But that I also really liked as a summer activity and is something that a lot of students should have, in their summer going into senior year, something that's relevant, high value, high agency, high intellectual vitality. It has cool, interesting themes with them installing the cameras. It culminated in the authorship of a paper. There are other, moves on the board like that that I think are very good as well. So summer workshops, continuing to scale that organization, the research, maybe it's something, that's related to something, some internship, some organization. Maybe it's again a collaboration between the students' organization. If you get into Yale and Global Scholars, that's great, but you also need to have backup plans, right? You need to have backup plans for other high value activities that you can scale. Again, like in this last year, what would get you from a top 15 to a top 10 or top 5 more significant awards, right? So when we have kids, like, what does a top 5 kid look like? Well, a kid in these areas, again, giving examples, they would potentially have USESO finalists, right? Top 40 in the country, right? That would be and sort of the talent, the logic, the depth components, sort of that those real like metrics on the resume side that show sort of outstanding potential from a talent perspective. You either need to have absolutely exceptional talent and the best kids have both. They have exceptional talent with real benchmarks, right? Metric scale, high level honors awards, etc and/or you need to have exceptional scarcity. This student, the scarcity isn't high enough for the talent or the ability, like, that would be things like USESO, talk about, Olympiads, right? Much higher degree of awards, like real benchmarks, right? Peer-reviewed publication, right? These are the things that stand out when you're talking about top 10, top 5 schools. You need that scarcity by way of the talent and the logic and the metrics, or you need it by being absolutely exceptionally rare and unique. The student doesn't have the absolute extreme scale with their organization. Like I mentioned, with a student who has hundreds of thousands of students with their curriculum, they don't have sort of the real standout, very well-known quantity, awards or whatever there are. There's some in here, right? But there's bigger awards in some of these fields. And then on the scarcity components, the environment and environmental fields are very common. Like they are very popular, especially with Gen Z and the newer generations, all about climate change. And so these areas have become increasingly oversaturated, right? These environmental areas. And so what the student did, I don't know if they got from the podcast or not, but what they did in intersecting their theater interests is really necessary because in the environmental themes in and of themselves are very not unique, particularly nowadays with students applying to these colleges. And so they needed the theater to intersect it to make it a lot more niche and unique, and bring in some more interesting themes. But even that being said, the students interested in Yale, these sort of like very, environment and social sciences and humanities and theater is very common at Yale. They don't have a shortage of it, which means it's not a major area where like, they're like, oh my goodness, once they get past the single choice early action round, they're like, we don't know if we'll get any regular decision applicants who'll be interested in the environment. It's like, no, they're not worried about that at all. Right. So you have to understand that the top line of the environmental extremely common in the applicant pools. The theater bringing it in some of these other niche sort of offshoots with the ethics and the more specific niche within under the environmental umbrella of conservation and wildlife, that's helping the case, but there's still a bunch of students applying to Yale or at Yale where they still will be operating in niche aspects of environmental areas because it's such a large umbrella and very popular. So the student doesn't really have that extreme scarcity. Extreme scarcity would be a topic that like literally nobody is working on or a niche that is extremely specific. Now the theater plus the environment, it's getting closer. I don't know that students will have that, but there'll be a lot of students who have structural similarities, which will mean they may not have that one very specifically, but they will have things that are enough-esque, under the environmental, and even Yale itself has a bunch of concentrations under the environmental umbrella. They will have a lot of students. Again, it's just there's a lot of students who will have these environmental themes, so it's really, really important to make them niche, but I think the overall environmental umbrella, does limit a little bit of, some of the scarcity or the requisite scarcity or being absolutely exceptional, and bringing in some of the other sort of like humanities or social sciences to intersect them is still kind of playing into a lot of what a bunch of other Yale students will do or will have, even including under the environmental department. And I think that's sort of well evinced by or well paralleled by the fact that Yale has a bunch of these sort of specific concentrations under the environmental umbrella, and there will be a lot of students who do have some of those other niche interests. So it's not absolutely exceptional in terms of sort of a scale or organization or gotten to extremely high level or major well-known awards, which I would keep looking into, because these are the things that would get, again, major scale to the organization, higher level awards. If you're talking about going from top 15 to solidly top 10 to potentially top 5, most people are not. They apply to top 10 or top 5 colleges. There are very few that are actually, competitive, and some people do get in, but they had like a 10 or 20% chance, and they just happen to hit the 1 in 10, whatever it is, 1 in like, but again, that could be a lot of risk for your candidacy in terms of blocking out other early schools. If you have another early school that you really want to go to, you have to understand there's a very high degree of escape velocity once you get to a top 15-ish resume, it gets very hard, and so the moves need to be, potentially a lot bigger, to really break through that escape velocity, that sort of very thick atmosphere to keep making those incremental gains. Again, it's like a sprinter going from 11 seconds to 10 seconds, but then going from 10 to 9.9 to 9.8 to 9.75, it just becomes very difficult. The answer to many people is it's not. You need to have some exceptionally rare things, parts of your candidacy. You need to accomplish an extremely high degree of scarcity via either uniqueness or exceptional ability or talent, or but ideally both. And so it's just sort of understanding, and there's much greater degrees of pressure as you move into that top 10, top 5, right? Now, in terms of some of the students' positioning, they put here, I mentioned sort of Yale. They put other schools which are just are tiers below. I'm not gonna talk about them a ton. I'm gonna talk about this mostly in the context of if you're very serious about Yale. Now, if you're not, right, you can wipe off a whole bunch of stuff that I basically said. If you're not very serious about doing the most, and the most doesn't have to be for the highest ranked school. The most could also be to try to give yourself some extra cushion at other schools that you want to go to that are also still very competitive. If you want to be operating from a place of doing the most for your candidacy, you will do the most for your candidacy. We have Yale here that will impose sort of the greatest degree of pressure on the school list, and they have sort of some other ones that are sort of like top 20, some very competitive in-state universities. The one of which they mentioned very competitive in state. Um, and so obviously there are going to be different degrees like I mentioned, and there's different levels of the game as I've said. But they put here intended areas of study evolutionary biology. The student clearly has interest in conservation. It doesn't fall as neatly under evolutionary biology, which I would say is a lot more. The student doesn't seem like a hardcore STEM student. They seem more like an environmental humanities student with a lot of the philosophy, the ethics, the theater, right? This doesn't seem like a bench scientist. Evolutionary biology is going to push you into some other lanes. It just leans more technical, and it's not really the best filter or really the best matching for the student's resume. So I would clearly wipe off the evolutionary biology. It's going to put you into a bunch of other lanes with people that I don't think you necessarily want to compete with, while also not really being the best way of presenting the students' evidence and their strengths. So I don't think evolutionary biology is the right way to go. You're looking more for stuff like probably potentially environmental policy and culture, like some environmental humanities. At Yale, you do have some conservation specific concentrations under the major, but you're looking for things that are more again, subsuming of the student's actual candidacy with these theater, these humanities, these ethics. They put here psychology, also no. Is there some psychology here? Yes, there's psychology in everything, right? But the student doesn't have, they've done nothing formally that is psychology. You would have to rip it out of the narrative, and there's just no reason to, because they have enough compelling stuff with what they've done. There's just no reason to position for psychology. It's also very oversubscribed, particularly for females. And so there's no strategic advantages there whatsoever, only liabilities. It doesn't make sense with a lot of the activities the student has. Philosophy, again, even though there's some ethics avenues here, and there's the conservation, and there's the values, and there's the committees they're on, and they won some awards for being a good person or whatever. The philosophy isn't, it's just, they don't have any, like strictly philosophy awards. And so it's more of a stretch, and it's an unnecessary stretch, right? The theater, they also put here, highly promising and highly strategic, because you're not going to get a lot of kids who are gonna be interested in applying for theater, and what they will have done is they will have pursued some form of the arts in high school, and then they will totally jettison it in their applications, and, it will be totally a sunk cost, because what they'll say is, "I don't wanna be an actor or a theater because I can't make money," and that's fine. It's just this application game is not a game of the future. It's a game of the past. It's, what do you have at this point in time? What do you have the most compelling evidence to apply for and to support? That's how it's evaluated. They don't evaluate your future because they don't have a crystal ball, right? This is not Nostradamus reading your application, right? So a lot of people continue to think about it in, it's not that it's an illogical way to think about it. You think about college as a gateway to what you're going to do in the future. The problem is, if you want to win the game of getting your foot in the door to go to one of those top colleges, you need to think about it backwards. From what do you have that you put in your application? Again, it's another arbitrage opportunity. Most people don't understand this. They think about it in the wrong way. Even though it's a very logical mental model, its logic is what makes it so easy to beat, because it's how most people think. All of the systematic ways that people think are also the systematic ways that you can exploit their strategy, basically, because they think in very common, very logical, very ordinary, very non-differentiated ways, right? And those become all of the strategic opportunities for the people who don't think in the same ways, right? So if you purely think about what you want to do for the rest of your life, and ideally they are the same, but they're not always the same. What you want to do for the rest of your life may not be the best evidence that you put on paper in this leg of the race, which is by age 18, right? And that's totally fine. Just get into the college and then you can change it, right? And you probably don't know. And I can tell you from experience, some of the best applicants that we've had who've gone through our program, the absolute standouts, some of them do change their mind. They change their mind, or they go in a little bit of different direction, or whatever it is, right? And that amazing, exceptional niche that they were actually really interested in, from 16 to 18, maybe they take the overall umbrella of the field, but they kind of go away from that niche. But that was like something extremely compelling, but it wasn't what they ended up doing for the rest of their life, right? And so you do have to understand, you can't just look at this by trying to like figure out the rest of your future. They do not evaluate your future, they evaluate your past. The only way that you can say they evaluate your future is by using your past as a proxy of what will happen in the future, right? But they cannot directly evaluate your future. And nobody cares what you say. It's just like, what do you have evidence to support, right? So she has this theater background, she has this theater skill set, it's highly strategically advantaging. Most students, because they don't know what they're, just they don't understand. They don't understand you have this stuff in your profile. Why do you not use it? Right? So theater, highly promising. Schools like Yale and some other schools that they mentioned, schools that don't have BFA programs, or maybe have the BFA, but you can apply for the BA program that's more academic. You can position yourself for some of those BA, the theater studies, the theater arts, whatever they call them. They're more academic. They're not, audition based or more technical. And so you can use that as part of your academic positioning. She has a theater narrative, she has theater resume, theater evidence, and this conservation plus theater, this is one of her activities that she's building. You have to put theater into the mix there, ideally, right? Now, it would depend by the school what they give you in terms of options. And you again have different degrees. But you would be probably, at the schools that allow it, you'd be trying to get in a theater sort of BA academic angle because it fits the narrative and the strengths in the profile. Then on top of that, I would forget about the evolutionary biology, the psychology, philosophy, only as tertiary, maybe very bottom of the list, but I would try to find other things that more closely match the students' strengths, which are mainly environmental studies, environmental humanities. Again, if the school has more niche environmental majors, those are even better, but not every school has them, right? Or some schools have the more niche concentrations like Yale, but it's under, you would have to explain it more in your essays because you can't maybe select it in the actual application under the major dropdown, right? And then you just have to understand in general if you need to explain your very specific niche or your specific part in terms of the department or extracurricular involvement or research, you need to do that in the essays because the drop downs are fairly rigid in terms of the majors that are offered in some cases. You want to go for the most niche majors, it doesn't always work like that. They don't always have, Northwestern has an environmental policy, and culture offering, right? But some other schools, don't have something that's as niche in terms of the drop down of the majors that you're choosing. And so the essays are where you can be the most specific and the most niche, and you can talk about whatever you want from your background and you can look up specific classes, you can look up specific research, specific professors, specific concentration, specific classes, specific syllabuses, specific things that were mentioned in the school newspaper, whatever it is, right? That's your maximum leverage for specificity and calibration and uniqueness, right? So certainly if you're talking about Yale, the Ev bio is just way down the totem pole. This student also, again, from a skill set perspective, does not seem like a hardcore STEM kid, which is great. That's a lot of their strengths in a lot of ways. Your strengths are your weaknesses in a lot of cases, right? So their strengths are they have these really cool stories and anecdotes, and they're, in rainforests, and they're putting up cameras, and it's just like it's cool, and they'll have a lot of leverage for telling really interesting stories, and they have cool themes. Their weaknesses might be a little bit of sort of the harder core talent STEM major awards, major scale, some of those things, right? So the Ev bio I would sort of cross off the list only as sort of a very far down, maybe a tertiary, if not psychology, philosophy, or something else. But I would have to sort of see the list of majors and everything that a school sort of would be giving us. And then also obviously ideally the rest of the students' candidacy to sort of really be able to make those final judgments. We went through a bunch of that. So basically wrapping everything up in terms of metrics, I would sort of say probably like top 20, top 25-ish metrics. We talked about some of the course selections, not elite level on the math track. In terms of extracurricular activities, they have some of this late stage. Would have been great if this had been started earlier, to sort of put together some of these next activities with the theater, the conservation, but you do the most that you can. Do not hold off until the summer. It's too late by that point in time. You need to be on max mode right now, max urgency mode. And life is hard, right? It's like you're taking junior year classes. That's rigorous. You have some grade liabilities, so your grades need to stay up, right? And it's just like this is the highest demands are placed again upon the people who have the highest goals, right? So what differentiates these kids who go to these top schools is they have a way higher output, right? Like they can handle much higher workloads, right? Whereas some other students would drown in 2 or 3 APs to get A's, let alone building a resume. The students who are the most competitive for these highly selective schools, they have much higher degrees of throughput and work capacity, right? And they are willing to make the sacrifices and the trade-offs in order to see that through and in order to even be able to handle that amount of work and that output because the other students simply won't make the sacrifices, right? They won't make the trade-offs. So this is sort of the league that you sign yourself up for. We went through extracurriculars resume. Again, a lot of really good things, niche themes. They have good impact. There's the high school club. Sounds like there's, international outreach. They have leadership in a bunch of their activities. They have good contributions. They have cool fellowships. They have great stories for the applications. A bunch of great stuff, but it's now really getting to that next level, and hitting that very high degree of escape velocity to get even past and to improve the resume even further. So, that is pretty much it for this episode. Again, we talked about sort of the final summer building, some of the strategic considerations. I will mention as well for Yale. This is sort of what I was forgetting a little bit that I want to mention. There was something in my mind. For Yale as well, if we're talking specifically about Yale, and I don't know how serious the student is about Yale particularly. It sounds like that might be somewhat exploratory, but I think it's at least good in terms of being representative of a very high standard that you can hold your candidacy to, and also if you want to keep maximum optionality. It does sound like they may be more just like, I don't know, like maybe Yale's a good fit or something. In terms of other strategic factors for Yale, one, the student's an overrepresented minority, so you have to keep that in mind. Second is, they are female in some humanities conservation. I don't know what the breakdown is of male versus female for conservation areas. It might be more female skewed. I don't know what the environmental breakdown is off the top of my head, but a lot more of the humanities and the humanities institutions like Yale, social science institutions do skew more female applicant pool. And we mentioned this on previous episodes, right? So a lot more of the very STEM heavy, engineering heavy, quant heavy schools do tend to skew more male. And then the ones that are more humanities, social sciences, like Yale versus Stanford, for example. Yale tends to skew towards a more female applicant pool, same as with Brown. We've mentioned this in some of the application deep dives this past summer. So at Yale overall, you have, I think, a 1 in 30 chance as a female and a 1 in 22 chance as a male. It's a pretty non-significant difference, so you have to keep that in mind. You are working a little bit against uphill battle of represented minority, and these are all the scarcity factors, right? These are like when you move up the ladder, these little differences, overrepresented minority versus underrepresented minority, right? Do you have any extra hooks or wild card factors or kickers, right? Do you have any legacy? These are the little things, in addition to the exceptional scarcity by way of either talent, ability, or by way of scarcity, that differentiate the kids at top 10 and top 5 schools, right? And so the student is female. That's disadvantaging at Yale. She's an overrepresented minority. That is disadvantaging at Yale. I don't know if the student has legacy. I don't believe they do, but I don't know because they mentioned sort of family ties. If they don't have legacy, that's also a disadvantage or a lack of a kicker, but the student also goes to a very competitive private school. I'm sure there are Yale legacies at their high school who will be applying. So if they have legacy, in best case, it will sort of net out with some other students from their high school. Obviously, it's better in terms of the overall context of the applicant pool. If they don't have legacy, sort of no advantage compared to, the rest of the applicant pool. And it could be a disadvantage compared to some students in their high school. And then obviously people in the applicant pool who just do have legacy. So it's these little tiny kickers. And for particularly when you're talking about top 5 schools, you need exceptional ability, exceptional scarcity, like a truly rare and unique narrative. And environmental is this is going in the right directions with the environmental and the theater theme, but I don't think it's not the real, like, truly exception. Like, there are students who just they are absolutely, like, 1 out of ones. But it's going in the right directions. It's not that that would be the main limiting factor, it's just there are other issues, right? There are some issues with the students' academic index. There's no other kickers. They're not underrepresented minority. I don't think they have legacy, but I'm 100% sure. They're from an overrepresented state. There's, like, a lot of other things, and these are the things that sort of add up, that are the greatest amount of pressure is applied to them when you're talking about top 5 schools, right? So, so you're working against some of the demographics constraints, doesn't have the highest degrees of exceptionality or scarcity via sort of, the uniqueness of the interest, doesn't have the highest degrees of scarcity via sort of exceptional talent. Nothing sort of like no peer review publications, major awards, USCSO, et cetera, which again, you can go look up some of the major awards and, you know, you can take your shot at them before you apply. But those that are sort of, still around. Then again, you have your shot with sort of trying to really scale up an organization, but it's hard with the sort of timeline that you're on, right? A high school journal is not going if you get a high school journal publication, that's not going to be a differentiator. It's probably not moving. It will help the candidacy, but it's not really moving it a ton past where it's currently at. Um, and so it's sort of a lacks exceptional ability or talent or scarcity via exceptional ability talent. It lacks exceptional scarcity via being exceptionally weird or wacky or unique. There's no exceptional demographic variables. In fact, is the opposite. Overrepresented state, overrepresented minority, female overrepresented at a primarily social sciences or humanities based institution. Again, I'm talking about this a lot through the prism of Yale. But I think this is important for a lot of people to hear who have these like top 5, top 10 goals. Um, and so you have that. And then you're also at Yale going to invite a lot of applicants who have very similar interests, environmental areas, social sciences, humanities, kids who are interested in theater, environmental humanities. So you are kind of competing strength against strength. And even if you have some uniqueness, there is some structural similarities of just like there's humanities kids intersecting humanities with other humanities and humanities with other social sciences. And Yale's not going to be super worried that, if you're talking about the early round again, it's just like they have a lot of kids who are in these overall. Is it exactly the same? Maybe not, but it's like they have a lot of kids who are like barking up the same trees. And whereas people see that as a fit factor, what they'll do is they'll go to Yale and they'll be like, "Oh, there are people like me, so I want to apply to Yale." But that's what also makes it a strategic liability, right? And so it's again, people operate under these very logical frameworks, but those logical frameworks don't create any strategic arbitrage. They don't create any alpha, right? As they say in investing. So, so you have to understand that as well. You're gonna be a little bit more commoditized in the Yale applicant pool. I would say then the other little wild card factors or kickers, since the student really is lacking a bunch of them, that again differentiates students at this tier of college, um, is are you doing single choice early action or not? And so it depends on what the other early schools are, right? It depends on, is the student serious about, like, would they maybe want to do ED to Brown? Or is another school that, really female loaded applicant pool. So maybe not the best example in the world. But, do you have another school that you like about as much, ideally more, about the same, or very close, where doing single choice early action to Yale would remove you doing potentially ED at that school, and then you potentially miss on both of them. If that's the case, then you have to be very careful about the single choice early action to Yale. If that's not the case, right, and you're okay with falling, you just want to go to a top 20 school, basically, and I don't know, you're gonna apply to say 20 of them, right? Now, the odds of hitting, we've sort of done this statistically, we did this in the master class. The odds of hitting, for the average applicants, even if you apply to 15 schools in the regular season round on a top 20 colleges, like you have a 70% chance of missing on all of them, and people just don't quite understand what the probabilities are because they just say, "Oh, a whole bunch of schools. I'll surely get into one of them." And that may be the case. For the average applicant, it's somewhere around 60 to 70% chance you miss on all of them, right? Even if you had 15 regular decision schools that are top 20 schools, that's about what the probability is for the average applicant, right? Now, again, are you average or you nice? It depends by the case. The student's candidacy is still in flux. Um, but it depends on what the risk reward is. What do after the visits, what are all the ratings of the schools? What are the probabilities of getting in? And so it has to be a very calculated decision. So there are cases in which the student would not do single choice early action, clear cases in which like maybe they had another school, it had ED, they risk not getting to either one of them. This is the situation most people will find themselves in, and they pick the wrong door. Provided that they can do ED, they don't do the ED to the top 10, top 15 school. They do the single choice to top 5 school. Then they miss on both of them, and then they end up going to number 8, right? It just depends. It depends on a lot of different subjective variables, right? With that being said, again, for Yale, it's sort of this damned if you do, damned if you don't possible situation. If you don't do single choice early action to Yale, I can tell you this student is not like this is a clear waitlisted/deny profile at Yale in the regular decision round, right? So, and there just will be no shortage of students who have some of these strengths and in these areas in the regular decision round, and you have to try to catch them when they're at their weakest, which is when they don't have anybody committed to the class. Now they don't Yale never has anybody committed to the class because they have single choice early action, so nobody ever puts in a binding commitment. Um, but they know that the kids they take single choice early action, those are the first kids they see, so they're the freshest. They get the greatest amount of review time. Their narratives are going to be as rare as they're ever going to be before you see the regular decision applicants, and they that's the best time, right? It's still signaling the greatest degree of commitment because you are blocking out some other alternatives. You're not doing ED anywhere else if you're doing single choice early action to Yale. So the student doesn't do single choice early action. That's like another one of the extra kickers. But in terms of what the other schools might be, if there's another top 10, top 15, school that they really want to go to that is ED, if they do the single choice early action to Yale, um, again, it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't potential situation. We wouldn't really know what the best decision is until the students build out the rest of their candidacy, and then we know what their sort of subjective ratings are in terms of the upside of all the different schools, and then what the risk tolerance is, and then et cetera, right? But I'm just sort of painting this sort of strategic picture here of if you don't do single source of action, you sort of lose a little bit one of those extra kickers. And this student doesn't really have any extra kickers as it already stands in terms of a lot of their profile, their demographic backgrounds, etc. So um, okay, that was it. There was one thing I was going to wrap up, but there was something that was sort of gnawing at me that I still wanted to say, and it was that in terms of some of the other strategic factors, particularly in the context of Yale, and then a little bit more structurally or generally for other people, are sort of like, what does it take to go to a top 5 school? It's like I've kind of given a picture of the degree of uniqueness and scarcity and exceptionality from potentially different places, right? In terms of students' demographic backgrounds, um, again, do you have any extra hooks or kickers, in terms of, legacy or anything else, right? These are the little tiny when you're talking about the absolute tippy top of the schools, it's like these extra millimeters, right? It's the male versus female. It's what's the area, what's the school. It's like all these different things. And it's not that they don't matter. They matter for all of the top schools, but the greatest degree of pressure is applied. It's like you're talking about like millimeters when you're talking about these top schools. And a lot of people just don't quite understand the degree of scarcity that is required. And the scarcity can be accomplished in a whole host of different ways in terms of the student's interest just being very rare, their talent being very rare, demographic variables, relationship to the college, and beyond. That's it for this episode. We went a lot longer than I was thinking we were going to go, but hopefully this was helpful. This did mimic a lot more of some of the application deep dives. And we will continue doing these case studies on an ongoing basis. Again, if you want us to review your current profile, or if you're a senior and you have a decision that's coming back in the next couple of weeks in the early round 2025, you can volunteer yourself to send us your application after the decision. Again, if you're accepted and you want us to sort of review it, probably not a lot of people will. Some people may want to do that if they're very kind, but if you got rejected or deferred and you want us to cover some of the weaknesses, we might be able to do that before the break and before you have to apply to some other schools. We'll let you know. Shoot us an email, info@greatmindsadvising.com. And again, to everyone else, some younger students as well, we'll continue to do some case studies on an ongoing basis, and you can email us as well if you'd like to volunteer, and we'll let you know if we can do it. So hopefully this was helpful to everyone, and we'll talk soon in the next episode. Bye bye.